Ladies and gentlemen, we stand at a historical precipice where the fleeting euphoria of a tactical victory threatens to obscure long-term strategic perils, a grim scenario I have witnessed far too often throughout my career in intelligence and defense when observing the military operation that just unfolded in Venezuela, where U.S. Delta Force operators executed a raid on a bunker in Caracas to seize Nicolás Maduro and his wife, Cilia Flores. I cannot help but recall past precedents like the capture of Manuel Noriega in Panama or the toppling of Saddam Hussein. We are often exceptionally skilled at decapitating a regime, which is merely the easiest step in a complex chain of military actions. But history has taught us a bloody lesson that the price paid for stability after the day of victory is the true burden. Spiriting these two figures out of the country in shackles aboard helicopters to a detention center in New York to face drug trafficking charges may provide an immediate sense of justice, but it leaves behind a massive power vacuum in an impoverished nation of 30 million people. We must view this event not as the happy ending of a Hollywood film, but as the beginning of a new, far more uncertain and dangerous chapter where diplomacy has been entirely supplanted by kinetic force and the responsibility for governance has been forcibly transferred to American shoulders. This abrupt policy shift did not occur by happenstance, but was the result of a specific cold calculation solidified during an October 2 meeting in the Oval Office, where Secretary of State Marco Rubio, alongside Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and General Dan Kane, agreed with President Trump that the time for diplomacy was over. The decision to escalate from limited lethal boat strikes to a direct military offensive aimed at ousting Maduro marks the return of regime change thinking, a mindset many naively believed had been buried after the failures in Iraq and Afghanistan. However, the core difference here lies in the motive and context. The objective is not merely security or democracy, but is tightly bound to the core economic interest of securing total access to Venezuela's oil reserves, the largest in the world. We are witnessing a dangerous intersection of national security policy and energy interests, a double-edged sword that could sever the United States' remaining diplomatic efforts in Latin America, if not handled with extreme precision. The long shadow of failed regime change efforts looms over Caracas, and if we are not careful, this tactical win could rapidly devolve into a strategic debacle, dragging the United States into a prolonged counterinsurgency in our own hemisphere. We must confront the cold, hard truth that the United States, as President Trump asserts, is now effectively in charge of Venezuela, and this immense burden rests directly on Marco Rubio. The characterization of a senior U.S. Official as the viceroy of Venezuela by historians is not a title of honor, but a stern warning regarding the nature of the current relationship. When we claim control over a sovereign nation, we simultaneously assume responsibility for the survival of 30 million people living in dire poverty. The harsh reality is that removing Maduro does not equate to dismantling his entrenched power structure. We are attempting to govern Venezuela through the very existing power structure we just attacked, a strategic paradox that would make any military planner shudder. For Secretary Rubio to be thrust into a position where he is expected to run the country while serving as National Security Advisor and Secretary of State is an impossible task, perhaps the trickiest high-wire act of his political career. The illusion that we can easily coerce Maduro's leftist allies who remain in power to hand over total access to oil reserves is politically dangerous naivete. We must frankly admit that controlling another nation's natural resources without the consent of its populace will be viewed as pillaging, or as one observer noted, pirates of the Caribbean. This will not only fuel anger among Venezuelans, but will stoke anti-American sentiment across Latin America. If the administration is seen as looting resources while the population remains impoverished, we will create fertile ground for insurgency. Furthermore, the strategy of using a U.S. naval armada to enforce a quarantine or blockade on oil exports to pressure acting leader Delcy Rodriguez is fraught with risk. A prolonged blockade is not only costly but risks a humanitarian disaster. Meanwhile, the administration has sidelined the Democratic opposition leaders, Maria Corina Machado and Edmundo Gonzalez, despite their electoral victory. By casting aside these figures, President Trump having dismissed Machado as lacking respect and Rubio reportedly recommending support for regime insider Delcy Rodriguez, instead we are trading democratic values for a fragile transactional control over oil. In this chaotic environment, the most pragmatic solution is not continued military escalation or the imposition of direct rule, but the pursuit of a realistic political transition. Instead of attempting to micromanage Venezuela from Washington, Mr. Rubio must move to reestablish a diplomatic presence in Caracas, not to dictate, but to facilitate dialogue. The State Department's preparations to reopen the embassy are a necessary first step. We must abandon the colonial fantasy of seizing total access to oil as a spoil of war and instead focus on transparent commercial engagement that allows the Venezuelan economy to recover. Sidelining Machado and Gonzalez is a strategic error. They must be reintegrated into the political picture to provide a civilian face to the transition and quell public outrage. The cost of failure is too high, with at least 80 people already killed in the operation. And Senator Mark Warner rightly questioning if the American people are up for another nation-building project based on oil. The administration must tread with maximum caution. We cannot build a stable nation on the foundation of resource extraction alone, and we must ensure Venezuela does not become another name on the long list of unfinished and tragic American military interventions.